January 17, 1944. The sky over the Western Front is an endless expanse of gray, streaked with the first hints of dawn. On the tarmac of a Luftwaffe airfield near the Rhineland, engines roar to life, vibrating through the cold morning air. Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf FW 190s, polished and battle-worn, taxi into formation. Pilots, faces sharp and eyes wary, grip their control sticks, the weight of past missions pressing silently on their shoulders. Above them, the wind carries a faint, almost imperceptible hum, a sound unlike anything the men have grown used to. Then, on the horizon, massive shapes appear, cutting through the clouds with unwavering speed. Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, glinting in the pale sun, their radial engines growling like a pack of predators. They dive, climb, and turn with a raw, unrelenting power that the Luftwaffe pilots have rarely seen. Whispers ripple along the lines. These are not the Spitfires or Mustangs they have faced before. These are beasts of the sky, armored and merciless. And as the first encounter begins, every seasoned ace knows, today, nothing will feel the same. The sun rises fully, illuminating the battlefield above and signaling the start of a confrontation that would etch the Thunderbolt into the memory of every Luftwaffe pilot who lived to tell the tale. By early 1944, the Luftwaffe, once the unrivaled master of the skies over Europe, was beginning to feel the strain of prolonged war. Years of continuous combat, attrition, and the relentless pressure of Allied bombing campaigns had left its ranks depleted. Veteran pilots, the aces who had once struck fear into Allied squadrons, were being replaced by younger, less experienced aviators. Training programs, once thorough and rigorous, had been shortened to meet the urgent demand for pilots. The skies over Germany were no longer a guaranteed stronghold. They were contested, dangerous, and increasingly unpredictable. The Allies, by contrast, had grown stronger in both technology and numbers. By 1943, the United States Army Air Forces had ramped up production of aircraft like the P-47 Thunderbolt, the P-51 Mustang, and the B-17 Flying Fortress. Industrial might and the ability to replace losses quickly had shifted the balance. Strategic bombing campaigns targeted factories, railways, and cities, slowly eroding Germany's capacity to sustain the war effort. Every sortie the Luftwaffe flew carried an unspoken awareness. Mistakes were costly, and survival was uncertain. The P-47 Thunderbolt, introduced in large numbers in late 1943, quickly gained a reputation that even the Luftwaffe could not ignore. Unlike the nimble Spitfires or the fast but lightly armored Mustangs, the Thunderbolt was built for endurance and firepower. Its radial engine, the massive Pratt & Whitney R-2800, could absorb damage that would cripple most fighters. 8.50 caliber machine guns lined its wings, delivering devastating volleys, and its sheer size and speed made it difficult to outmaneuver, especially in sustained dogfights. Pilots who faced it spoke of its ability to dive relentlessly, its engines screaming in defiance of German attacks, shrugging off hits that would ground other aircraft. The impact of the Thunderbolt was not merely technological. It reshaped air combat strategy. Luftwaffe pilots, trained to rely on agility and formation tactics, now confronted a plane that could endure punishment and still return fire with brutal efficiency. Previous encounters with Spitfires and early Mustangs had allowed them to exploit weaknesses with precision. The Thunderbolt offered few. It forced pilots to rethink attack angles, reconsider dive tactics, and measure the risk of every engagement. For many aces, who had survived years of aerial warfare, this was an unprecedented challenge. The strategic context also amplified the threat. By 1944, the Allies were conducting deep penetration bombing raids over Germany, escorted by large formations of P-47s. These raids were no longer mere disruptions. They were systematic assaults designed to destroy Germany's industrial backbone. The Luftwaffe, with dwindling numbers and stretched resources, had to respond. Interceptions became perilous. Every engagement carried not only the risk of death, but the potential loss of an aircraft that could not be replaced quickly. The scale of the conflict had transformed the sky into a theater of attrition, where technological supremacy increasingly determined the outcome. In personal accounts and post-war memoirs, Luftwaffe aces would later recall the psychological weight of facing the Thunderbolt. Experienced pilots spoke of the first sighting of the plane in the air as a moment of recognition. This was not just another fighter. It was a formidable opponent that demanded respect. Its durability in combat and the ferocity of its attacks challenged even the most seasoned pilots. The P-47 was not merely a machine. It became a measure of a pilot's skill, courage, and adaptability. Even on the ground, mechanics and commanders took note. Field reports emphasized the Thunderbolt's armor, noting that superficial damage often hid the aircraft's continued operational capability. Intelligence briefings detailed encounters where P-47s survived flak bursts, collisions, and multiple hits from German armaments. The growing awareness of these capabilities fed a subtle, creeping unease within Luftwaffe ranks. The Thunderbolt was a game-changer, a new standard of aerial resilience that demanded a recalibration of everything they had learned about air combat. This period, then, was one of tension and transformation. The skies above Western Europe had shifted from a familiar battleground into a proving ground for innovation, endurance, and human courage. And as the first P-47s began to dominate escort missions, the Luftwaffe confronted not only a technological adversary, but a psychological one, a reminder that in war, the rules could change overnight. The stage was set. Pilots would soon find themselves facing a machine that would redefine fear in the air, and the battles to come would test the limits of both man and metal. By mid-1944, the air war over Western Europe had reached an unprecedented intensity. The Allies, now fully mobilized and confident in their industrial superiority, launched regular bomber raids deep into German-held territory. Cities, factories, and transportation hubs became targets, not only to cripple war production, but also to undermine morale. The Luftwaffe faced a dual challenge: defend against high-altitude bomber formations and contend with the increasingly lethal fighter escorts. Among these, the P-47 Thunderbolt had begun to establish a reputation that would haunt German pilots for the remainder of the war. The Thunderbolt's operational profile was unique. Unlike the lighter, more maneuverable fighters the Luftwaffe had previously faced, the P-47 excelled at high-speed, high-altitude engagements. Its rugged construction allowed it to absorb damage while maintaining control. Accounts from Luftwaffe intelligence reports detail multiple encounters where a P-47, riddled with bullets and flak, continued to fly, dive, and climb with almost unshakable determination. Its 8.50 caliber machine guns delivered concentrated firepower that could shred both enemy aircraft and ground targets. German pilots began to recognize that conventional dogfighting tactics, turns, dives, and climbs intended to exploit agility, were less effective against the Thunderbolt. The American approach to air combat further magnified the threat. Escorting heavy bombers on deep raids, P-47 squadrons employed coordinated, disciplined formations that emphasized mutual support. They combined speed, altitude advantage, and firepower in ways that required German pilots to take calculated risks. Luftwaffe veterans recalled the difficulty of isolating a single P-47 for attack without exposing themselves to counterfire. Even when superior in maneuverability, German aircraft often could not escape the overlapping fields of fire and the sheer resilience of the Thunderbolt's airframe. These challenges extended to leadership decisions. Luftwaffe commanders faced an increasingly dire calculus: where to deploy scarce fighter units, when to engage, and how to minimize losses. Reports from the Reich Air Ministry show an awareness of the P-47's destructive capabilities and the necessity to adapt tactics. Some recommended focusing on surprise attacks during dawn or dusk when the Thunderbolt's speed advantage was less decisive. Others emphasized altitude and dive tactics to exploit moments when the aircraft's mass could limit its agility. Yet, even with tactical adjustments, pilots continued to regard the P-47 with a mixture of awe and apprehension. On a human level, the Thunderbolt left a profound psychological imprint. Memoirs of Luftwaffe aces often describe a heightened sense of vulnerability during engagements. Unlike earlier encounters, where skill and experience could compensate for numerical or technological inferiority, The P-47 demanded respect for its raw endurance and firepower. Pilots like Gunther Rall and Otto Kittel, themselves among the most decorated and skilled German aces, acknowledged the Thunderbolt's unique threat. Some admitted, in post-war interviews, that they had never feared any aircraft as much as this American fighter. It was not only its ability to survive hits, but also the manner in which it dominated the sky that left a lasting impression on men accustomed to aerial supremacy. The wider context reinforced this perception. Allied intelligence and propaganda emphasized the Thunderbolt's role as an unstoppable escort. Reports circulated among Luftwaffe ranks of entire squadrons being forced to disengage after brief skirmishes, unable to overcome the combined factors of speed, durability, and coordinated fire. This narrative filtered back to pilots through mission briefings and field debriefings, creating an almost mythic status for the aircraft even before individual encounters occurred. By the summer of 1944, as the Allies prepared for the Normandy landings, the Thunderbolt was no longer merely a new fighter. It had become a symbol of shifting air superiority. Its presence over Europe signaled a transition in aerial warfare, from the delicate balance of maneuver and skill to a contest increasingly defined by endurance, firepower, and industrial capacity. The Luftwaffe, while still capable of extraordinary feats in the air, now faced an opponent that challenged not only their tactics, but the very assumptions on which their confidence rested. As German pilots readied themselves for the sorties that would meet this formidable aircraft, the stage was set for encounters that were intense, chaotic, and transformative. The Thunderbolt was not just a plane. It was a proving ground, testing the limits of human skill and courage under fire. And in the dogfights to come, the experiences of the Luftwaffe would forever bear the mark of this American innovation in air power. The human angle of facing the P-47 Thunderbolt was as profound as its technological superiority. Luftwaffe pilots, many of whom had survived countless engagements over Europe, described a unique tension when they first saw these aircraft in the skies. Unlike previous encounters, there was an immediate recognition that conventional tactics, reliant on agility, surprise, and coordination, might not be enough. Even aces, men whose names were whispered with respect across the Luftwaffe, admitted to a mixture of awe and apprehension. Memoirs from pilots like Hans-Joachim Marseille and Gunther Rall recall the first moments of engagement, the sheer mass of the Thunderbolt, its relentless engine note, and the sight of its wing-mounted firepower could instill an almost visceral fear. It was not fear of dying in battle, something all pilots accepted, but the awareness that survival now demanded extraordinary precision and adaptability. This psychological weight translated into tactical adjustments. German pilots began reevaluating their traditional dogfighting maneuvers. The Thunderbolt's ability to absorb damage meant that high-speed dives and short bursts of attack were no longer sufficient. Luftwaffe reports emphasized hit-and-run strategies, coordinated attacks from multiple directions, and careful use of altitude. Pilots were instructed to avoid prolonged engagements, particularly in flat terrain where the P-47 could exploit its speed and dive potential. Training manuals and field briefings increasingly highlighted reconnaissance, surprise, and the necessity of striking before being detected. The tactical evolution was clear. Facing the Thunderbolt required not only skill but foresight, discipline, and a measure of calculated risk that many aces had never had to consider before. Technological factors further complicated these confrontations. The P-47 was a technological marvel of its era. Its Pratt & Whitney R-2800 radial engine produced nearly 2,000 horsepower, providing acceleration and durability unmatched by most Luftwaffe fighters. The Thunderbolt's thick fuselage and robust wing structure allowed it to survive hits from 20mm cannons and smaller armaments that would destroy other aircraft. German pilots noted that superficial bullet holes often concealed functional engines and control surfaces. Its 8.50 caliber machine guns could deliver concentrated, destructive fire in fractions of a second, leaving little margin for evasive maneuvers. Additionally, its wide operational ceiling allowed American pilots to exploit altitude advantages, diving on German aircraft with terrifying speed while retaining maneuverability in the vertical plane. The combination of these attributes redefined engagement dynamics, The pilot was no longer the dominant variable in combat. The aircraft itself had become an active agent in determining outcomes. The human, tactical, and technological dimensions intertwined to create an entirely new combat environment. A pilot's skill was still critical, but it was now measured against an aircraft designed to endure punishment and retaliate with overwhelming force. Veteran aces reported a growing emphasis on pre-mission intelligence, meticulous planning, and mental preparation. They had to anticipate not only the Thunderbolt's trajectory and firepower, but also the strategies of the American squadrons that operated it. Each encounter became a test of both nerves and intellect, where a single miscalculation could be fatal. The psychological strain extended beyond the cockpit. Squadron morale, already under pressure from losses and extended operations, was affected by the growing reputation of the Thunderbolt. Commanders noted heightened tension before sorties, even among seasoned pilots. Letters from Luftwaffe personnel in 1944 reveal a pervasive anxiety. The Thunderbolt was not just a formidable opponent. It was a benchmark that measured their limits. Veteran pilots encouraged younger aviators to respect the aircraft and approach engagements with caution, reinforcing the idea that courage alone would not suffice. This angle, blending the human and technological, highlights a broader truth of aerial warfare. Innovation in machinery can alter the very mindset of those who must face it. The P-47 was more than a plane. It was a force that demanded adaptation, reshaping tactics, attitudes, and survival strategies. By mid-1944, the presence of the Thunderbolt in European skies was as much a psychological obstacle as a physical one, a fact that Luftwaffe reports and pilot memoirs repeatedly underline. From a leadership perspective, the emergence of the P-47 Thunderbolt presented the Luftwaffe command with unprecedented challenges. High-ranking officers were acutely aware that the balance of air superiority was shifting. Reports from the front emphasized not just the Thunderbolt's capabilities, but the broader implications for German defensive operations. Luftwaffe leaders had to decide how to allocate dwindling resources, which units would intercept bombers escorted by P-47s, and how to preserve the lives of their remaining skilled pilots. Tactical doctrines that had worked in earlier campaigns were no longer sufficient. Orders increasingly emphasized surprise attacks at dawn or dusk, coordinated multi-plane strikes, and avoiding prolonged engagements where the Thunderbolt's durability could dominate. These decisions were not abstract. They had immediate consequences on pilot survival, mission outcomes, and the Luftwaffe's overall operational capacity. Equally important was the enemy angle. American pilots flying the Thunderbolt approached combat with confidence born of rigorous training, numerical superiority, and a clear understanding of their aircraft strengths. Their doctrine emphasized mutual support, disciplined formations, and the combination of altitude advantage with high-speed dives. The P-47 allowed them to escort bombers deep into enemy territory with relative security, forcing Luftwaffe pilots into risky encounters. Intelligence reports later highlighted the efficiency of American tactics. Pilots coordinated attacks to draw German fighters into positions where the Thunderbolt's firepower could be decisive. For German pilots, facing these squadrons was like facing an orchestrated machine. Every move had been calculated, every advantage exploited. The Thunderbolt was not merely a plane. It was a component of a broader strategic system designed to dominate the skies. Moral considerations also played a subtle role in the engagements. Luftwaffe pilots were acutely aware that the war was increasingly one of attrition, where survival and mission completion often outweighed traditional notions of honor or chivalry in the air. Reports and memoirs describe moments of internal conflict. The desire to engage skillfully and decisively clashed with the instinct for self-preservation against a nearly indestructible opponent. The Thunderbolt's ability to shrug off hits while delivering devastating return fire forced pilots to confront the stark reality that courage alone could no longer guarantee success. This moral tension between duty and survival became a constant undercurrent in the Luftwaffe's air operations. The interplay of leadership, enemy proficiency, and ethical calculations created a complex combat environment. Commanders had to anticipate pilot reactions, adjust strategies, and manage limited resources against a backdrop of psychological strain. Pilots, in turn, were forced to reconcile their understanding of aerial combat with the new realities imposed by the Thunderbolt. The aircraft became more than a machine. It was a catalyst that reshaped decision-making at every level. Technology remained intertwined with these perspectives. Leadership directives emphasized the need for tactical adaptation, but the human and mechanical elements combined to produce unpredictable outcomes. A single misjudgment could neutralize years of training. Even when experienced aces attempted innovative maneuvers, the Thunderbolt's robust construction and concentrated firepower often dictated the engagement's pace and result. American reports corroborate these accounts, noting the remarkable resilience of the aircraft and the skill of its pilots in exploiting these advantages. In hindsight, these angles reveal why Luftwaffe aces later admitted that no other aircraft had instilled the same level of respect and fear. It was a combination of human psychology, technological innovation, tactical evolution, and strategic orchestration that made the Thunderbolt a defining force in the air war over Europe. By mid-1944, the presence of these planes had irrevocably altered the nature of aerial combat, forcing a generation of pilots and commanders to confront a reality they could not ignore. The consequences of these adjustments would soon be tested in a series of intense confrontations that marked the turning point in the air war. The next chapters of the story lead directly into the decisive battles and dogfights that would demonstrate, in stark and unambiguous terms, the Thunderbolt's supremacy and the Luftwaffe's struggle to respond. June 11, 1944. Over the skies of Normandy, a vast formation of American bombers climbed through the early morning clouds, escorted by squadrons of Republic P-47 Thunderbolts. The mission, to disrupt German reinforcements heading to the beaches, a prelude to the Normandy invasion that had begun 5 days earlier. On the ground, Luftwaffe controllers tracked the approaching aircraft, sending up Focke-Wulf FW-190s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s to intercept. Among the German pilots were seasoned aces, men who had faced Spitfires over Britain and Mustangs over France. Yet nothing in their experience had prepared them for what they were about to encounter. The first clashes occurred at high altitude, over the rolling fields near Cannes. The Thunderbolts, flying in tight combat box formations, maintained altitude and speed, descending in controlled dives to protect the bombers. German fighters attempted to break through, employing climbing turns and head-on attacks, but the P-47s absorbed the impacts with astonishing resilience. Bullets tore through wings and fuselage, yet many Thunderbolts remained fully operational, returning fire with precision. Luftwaffe pilots reported witnessing planes that, by all rights, should have spiraled to the ground continuing to maneuver, their radial engines roaring defiantly. One particularly fierce engagement involved a squadron of FW-190s, led by Oberleutnant Heinrich Bahr, a decorated ace with over 200 confirmed victories. Bahr's unit dived onto a formation of Thunderbolts protecting B-17s, targeting what appeared to be the least defended aircraft. Within seconds, they were met with a concentrated hail of .50 caliber fire. Bahr later described in his memoirs the sensation of striking metal and hearing it fight back. The Thunderbolt was not simply surviving. It was dominating the encounter. Several German planes were damaged or destroyed within minutes, and the squadron was forced to disengage, retreating with heavy losses. The technological edge of the P-47 became painfully apparent. Its ability to sustain damage allowed American pilots to continue their escort duties without pause. Tactical formations, previously exploited by German aces for isolated kills, became near impenetrable. Attempts to lure Thunderbolts into tail chase scenarios often ended in disaster. Luftwaffe reports note that pilots underestimated the combination of speed, firepower, and altitude advantage, leading to repeated failed attacks. In several instances, entire squadrons were scattered, their cohesion shattered by the Thunderbolt's overwhelming presence. This confrontation was not limited to individual skill. Leadership decisions, coordination, and real-time adaptability defined the battle's outcome. American squadron leaders executed strict formation discipline, covering each other's blind spots and coordinating dives with remarkable precision. German officers, recognizing the increasing ineffectiveness of conventional interception strategies, attempted to innovate with flanking maneuvers and altitude advantages. However, these tactics often proved insufficient against the P-47's combined performance characteristics. Even the most daring German pilots faced a calculated machine, one that could anticipate and counter conventional strategies with brutal efficiency. Psychologically, the impact on Luftwaffe pilots was immediate. Veterans who had once prided themselves on their ability to dominate airspace now faced the terrifying realization that they were fighting a new class of adversary. Memoirs and field reports describe moments of hesitation and disbelief, instances where pilots aborted attacks mid-engagement, acknowledging that the Thunderbolt could survive what would have been lethal strikes against any other fighter. The aircraft's resilience, coupled with the skill of American pilots, created a unique tension, an uneasy mixture of respect, fear, and frustration that permeated every engagement. By late June, similar encounters occurred across northern France. Luftwaffe units attempting to protect convoys, airfields, and strategic positions increasingly reported the same pattern. The Thunderbolt was hard to destroy, difficult to outmaneuver, and relentless in protecting bombers. Casualty lists grew longer, morale was affected, and the realization spread that air superiority was slipping from German control. These high-intensity battles marked a turning point. The Luftwaffe could no longer rely on past methods or even pilot experience alone. The rules of engagement had shifted, and the Thunderbolt was the instrument that had enforced this new reality. Amid these confrontations, stories emerged of individual heroism and tactical improvisation. Some German pilots achieved remarkable feats, temporarily breaking through formations or downing a Thunderbolt with exceptional skill. Yet such successes were rare and often came at high cost. The encounters underscored a stark truth. The P-47 was not merely a tool of war. It was a paradigm shift, redefining the limits of aerial combat and challenging the Luftwaffe's mastery of the skies. The air battles over Normandy in June 1944 left no doubt that the Thunderbolt had altered the trajectory of the air war. German pilots would continue to fight, but the psychological and technological impact of these encounters was indelible. The next phase of the conflict would test the Luftwaffe's ability to adapt or risk further decimation. July 24, 1944. The skies over the Falaise Gap, a critical corridor in northern France, were alive with the thunder of engines. Luftwaffe pilots scrambled to intercept yet another wave of American bombers, escorted by P-47 Thunderbolts. The stakes had escalated. Ground forces depended on air support, and every sortie carried not just the weight of strategy, but the survival of German units trapped in a tightening pocket. Experienced pilots like Erich Hartmann and Walter Nauedny, renowned for their kill counts, approached the engagement with caution. For the first time, even aces knew that skill alone would not guarantee victory. The battle erupted at 18,000 feet. German fighters dove from the clouds, seeking to disrupt bomber formations before they could release payloads. The Thunderbolts, however, maintained disciplined defensive positions. Their radial engines roared through the turbulent air as they executed tight banking maneuvers, overlapping fields of fire covering each vulnerable bomber. German pilots found themselves caught in crossfire almost instantly. Reports described the visceral moment when FW-190s were shredded by sustained bursts from wing-mounted machine guns. Planes that had dived for attack sometimes emerged with smoke trailing, but still capable of coordinated flight. The resilience of the P-47 was staggering, leaving Luftwaffe pilots to reconcile the familiar logic of aerial combat with an entirely new reality. Tactics were tested to their limits. German units attempted head-on passes, high-speed climbs, and diving attacks in succession, seeking any vulnerability. Yet the Thunderbolt's combination of armor and firepower rendered these maneuvers only partially effective. One notable incident involved a swarm led by Major Heinz Barr, which attempted a coordinated pincer maneuver on a formation of P-47s escorting B-24 Liberators. Within minutes, the German pilots found themselves forced to break formation under heavy fire. B-24s completed their bombing runs, the Thunderbolts unscathed, while several FW-190s were left smoking in retreat. Such engagements became increasingly common. The Luftwaffe's best pilots realized that raw aggression and maneuvering finesse were no longer sufficient to overcome the P-47. The human cost was profound. Casualty reports from July 1944 indicate a rising trend of experienced aces lost in encounters with Thunderbolt-escorted bombers. Memoirs from surviving pilots recount the frustration and disbelief of seeing aircraft survive hits that would have guaranteed a kill in previous battles. The psychological strain of repeated failure against a single aircraft type cannot be overstated. Luftwaffe squadrons, accustomed to controlling the air, now confronted a plane that seemed to anticipate their every tactic. Respect for the Thunderbolt turned to wariness. Wariness often turned into fear, a rare and significant shift in the psychology of elite fighter pilots. The technological supremacy of the P-47 was undeniable in these engagements. Its massive radial engine not only allowed for unmatched speed at altitude, but also enabled rapid recoveries from dives that would have sent lighter fighters into spins. Its 8.50 caliber machine guns delivered firepower capable of destroying a B-24 bomber in a matter of seconds if left unchecked. Even when heavily damaged, the Thunderbolt retained structural integrity, allowing pilots to disengage and return to base, a capability that German aircraft could rarely match. This combination of durability and lethality created a tactical environment in which the Luftwaffe was forced to operate on terms set by the enemy, rather than dictating the fight themselves. The culmination of these July engagements underscored a decisive turning point. The Luftwaffe could no longer mount large-scale effective interceptions without significant losses. The P-47, operating in concert with strategic bombing campaigns, shifted the initiative firmly to the Allies. Individual heroics by German pilots, while notable, could not reverse the broader trend. The reality was clear. The airspace over northern France, once contested, was increasingly dominated by the capabilities of the Thunderbolt and the disciplined tactics of its American pilots. By the end of July 1944, the Luftwaffe's losses, both material and psychological, had reached critical levels. Reports note the cumulative effect on unit cohesion, pilot morale, and strategic planning. The Thunderbolt's impact extended beyond isolated victories. It fundamentally altered the calculus of air warfare. It forced the Luftwaffe to rethink interception strategies, to ration experienced pilots, and to accept that a new generation of aircraft had redefined what it meant to survive and to fight in the skies of Europe. These encounters, marked by intensity, courage, and technological supremacy, laid the groundwork for the aftermath of the air war over Western Europe. The next chapter will examine the consequences of these battles, who emerged victorious, the scale of destruction, and the strategic and psychological shifts that reshaped the Luftwaffe for the final months of the conflict. By August 1944, the air war over Western Europe had delivered a harsh verdict. The Luftwaffe, once a symbol of German dominance in the skies, had suffered heavy losses in both men and machines. The encounters with the P-47 Thunderbolt had exposed vulnerabilities that could no longer be ignored. Pilot casualties mounted rapidly, with experienced aces who had survived countless engagements against Spitfires and earlier Mustangs, now falling to the relentless combination of firepower, speed, and resilience offered by the Thunderbolt. Field reports from Luftwaffe units in Normandy described squadron rosters thinning dramatically, leaving fewer veterans to mentor the influx of younger, less experienced pilots pressed into service. The material toll was equally significant. Focke-Wulf FW-190s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s were lost at unprecedented rates when confronting well-escorted American bomber formations. In many engagements, German fighters could inflict only limited damage before being forced to withdraw under concentrated Thunderbolt fire. Even aircraft that returned to base often required extensive repairs, as the P-47's powerful guns and concentrated attack patterns had taken a toll. The Luftwaffe's logistical strain intensified, with maintenance crews working around the clock to repair damaged aircraft, while production lines struggled to keep pace with losses. The dominance of the Thunderbolt reshaped not only tactical outcomes, but also the broader strategic situation. American bombers were increasingly able to strike critical infrastructure with minimal interference, a fact that contributed directly to the collapse of German defensive capabilities in northern France. Key rail lines, bridges, and supply depots were destroyed, slowing the movement of reinforcements and hampering the Luftwaffe's ability to respond effectively. The integration of air power and ground operations became a force multiplier for the Allies, while the Luftwaffe found itself increasingly reactive, forced to defend fragmented sectors rather than exerting control over the skies. Morale among Luftwaffe pilots and commanders declined steadily. Memoirs from surviving aces highlight a pervasive sense of frustration and resignation. Pilots admitted that the Thunderbolt was not just another aircraft. They regarded it as an almost insurmountable obstacle, a symbol of the industrial and tactical advantage the Allies now held. Letters and diary entries from the period convey the psychological weight of repeated engagements in which skill and bravery could be insufficient to guarantee survival. The combination of mounting losses, disrupted operations, and the looming threat of Allied air power created a climate of fatigue and unease that permeated Luftwaffe units across occupied Europe. Yet even amidst these setbacks, there were moments of remarkable resilience. Some German pilots achieved notable successes, exploiting terrain, weather, or brief lapses in American formations. These victories, however, were often fleeting and came at significant cost. They underscored both the courage and adaptability of Luftwaffe aviators, but also highlighted the larger imbalance that had emerged. The Thunderbolt had effectively set new standards in aerial combat. Durability, firepower, and the ability to sustain offensive operations under heavy pressure. In this new environment, German pilots were forced to recalibrate their expectations, strategies, and understanding of survival in the air. The reports and statistical data from this period confirm a clear trend. By the end of the summer, the Luftwaffe had lost hundreds of aircraft in encounters with Thunderbolt-escorted bombers. Pilot attrition, damage rates, and mission failures reflected a dramatic shift in air superiority. The Thunderbolt was no longer merely a powerful fighter. It had become a symbol of the Allies' industrial might and tactical coordination. Its impact on the Luftwaffe's operational effectiveness was immediate and decisive, reshaping the nature of the aerial conflict and marking a turning point in the Western European theater. As the Allies consolidated control of the skies, the stage was set for the Luftwaffe's final, desperate attempts to adapt. Commanders and pilots alike had to face the consequences of technological and tactical evolution on a scale they had never experienced. The next section will explore these adaptations, the longer-term effects on strategy, and how the Thunderbolt influenced the final months of German air operations. As the summer of 1944 progressed, the Luftwaffe faced the grim reality of adaptation under extreme pressure. Commanders were forced to reconsider operational priorities, often concentrating limited fighter units around critical industrial zones or strategic corridors. Missions were increasingly selective, with a focus on defending vital targets rather than pursuing widespread air superiority. Reports indicate that some Luftwaffe units were restricted to short, high-altitude interceptions, designed to engage Allied bombers only when the tactical advantage was evident. The presence of P-47 Thunderbolts, however, complicated even these carefully planned operations. Their speed, firepower, and durability meant that conventional interception techniques, head-on attacks, climbing dives, and formation splitting were fraught with danger, often producing high losses without decisive results. Technological adaptation became another priority. German engineers and strategists examined ways to counter the Thunderbolt's strengths. Efforts included modifications to armament loadouts, the development of heavier cannons, and adjustments to flight tactics aimed at exploiting perceived weaknesses in the P-47's maneuverability. Jet aircraft, like the Messerschmitt Me-262, were rushed into combat partly to counter the overwhelming numerical and technological advantage of Allied fighters. Despite these efforts, the Thunderbolt remained a formidable opponent. Its rugged airframe and concentrated firepower had already rewritten the rules of aerial engagement, leaving German innovations perpetually one step behind. The human dimension remained critical. Surviving Luftwaffe aces continued to mentor new pilots, emphasizing adaptability and caution. Field reports from late 1944 reveal that experienced pilots advised avoiding protracted engagements with Thunderbolts unless a clear tactical advantage could be secured. Psychological resilience became as important as technical skill. Letters from Luftwaffe units described the mental strain of repeated exposure to a near-invincible adversary, highlighting fear, respect, and determination as constant undercurrents in daily operations. Even the bravest pilots learned that patience, timing, and strategic thinking could mean the difference between survival and destruction. Post-war reflections underscore the lasting impact of the Thunderbolt on Luftwaffe operations. In interviews and memoirs, German aces consistently emphasized that no other Allied aircraft had instilled the same level of apprehension and respect. The Thunderbolt was recognized not only for its technical capabilities, but for its role in changing the nature of aerial combat. Its presence over Europe forced pilots and commanders to confront a harsh reality. Technological superiority and disciplined tactics could outweigh even years of experience and skill. The lessons learned in these encounters became case studies in air warfare, influencing post-war aviation strategy, aircraft design, and tactical doctrine for decades to come. Strategically, the dominance of the Thunderbolt contributed to the broader collapse of German defensive operations in Western Europe. Allied air superiority allowed for the continuous movement of troops, supplies, and artillery to support ground offensives, particularly during the Normandy campaign and the subsequent breakout across France. The Luftwaffe, constrained by losses, fatigue, and the overwhelming presence of superior aircraft, struggled to provide effective resistance. The cumulative effect of these factors hastened the pace of Allied advances and reinforced the notion that control of the skies was increasingly decisive in modern warfare. In the end, the aftermath of the Thunderbolt's emergence was multifaceted. It reshaped Luftwaffe strategy, dictated tactical adaptations, imposed psychological burdens on pilots, and accelerated technological experimentation. Its impact was both immediate, through losses and disrupted missions, and enduring, shaping the lessons of air warfare for generations. The Thunderbolt's dominance over German skies in 1944 marked a turning point not only in specific battles, but in the evolution of aerial combat itself. The stage was now set for reflection. Beyond statistics, battles, and strategies lies the human and historical significance of these encounters. A calm, philosophical consideration of what the Thunderbolt represented for warfare, technology, and the courage of those who flew against it. The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt and its impact on the Luftwaffe is not merely a tale of machines and statistics. It is a story of human endurance, adaptation, and the limits of skill in the face of technological evolution. In the summer skies over Europe, German pilots confronted an aircraft that challenged everything they had known about aerial combat. The Thunderbolt was faster, stronger, and more resilient than almost any fighter they had previously faced. It demanded respect, inspired caution, and reshaped the psychology of the men who flew against it. Even the most seasoned aces, with hundreds of victories to their name, acknowledged a unique fear and a begrudging admiration for its capabilities. Yet within this narrative lies a broader reflection on the nature of warfare itself. The Thunderbolt was not invincible. It was a product of human ingenuity, industrial might, and strategic vision. Its dominance reminds us that technology and preparation often redefine the battlefield as decisively as courage and experience. The encounters over Normandy, the Falaise Gap, and northern France illustrate how innovation can shift the balance of power, forcing adaptation in strategy, tactics, and human behavior. Pilots learned that survival was not just a matter of skill but of anticipation, judgment, and respect for the forces at play. There is a quiet lesson in these skies. Progress in war comes at tremendous cost. Each engagement carried loss, risk, and the psychological weight of confronting something greater than oneself. The Thunderbolt became a symbol not only of Allied strength, but of the evolution of aerial warfare, a machine that tested the limits of human skill and endurance. Its legacy is preserved in the accounts of pilots, the reports of commanders, and the history of air combat that followed. Ultimately, the story of the Thunderbolt and the Luftwaffe is a reminder of the intertwined nature of technology and humanity. It shows that courage is measured not only by victories, but by the ability to confront an overwhelming challenge with resolve, to adapt, and to survive. In the quiet aftermath, above the shattered skies of Europe, the echoes of those battles endure, a testament to innovation, resilience, and the enduring human spirit amidst the machinery of war.